In a stunning turn of events, Canada has just delivered a crippling counterstrike in response to new US tariffs, one that could devastate the American farming industry and send shockwaves through the entire economy. For decades, American farmers have depended on Canada as a top buyer of corn, soybeans, beef, and dairy. But now, that relationship is unraveling. Tariffs are slashing profits, surplus crops are piling up, and family farms are being squeezed out by mounting financial pressure. So why is Canada making these bold moves? Which farming sectors are getting hit the hardest? And what does this mean for the future of American agriculture? Stick with me, because the fallout could be far worse than anyone expected. What's happening? In the early 2025, the long-standing relationship between the US and Canada faced a major disruption when the United States, under President Donald Trump, imposed a 25% tariff on imports from Canada and Mexico. The administration justified these tariffs by citing concerns over illegal immigration, drug trafficking, and trade imbalances. The move was unexpected and triggered immediate economic consequences. Canadian officials strongly opposed the tariffs, arguing that they were unjustified and harmful to both nations. The sudden imposition of trade barriers created uncertainty for businesses, disrupted supply chains, and raised concerns about economic stability in North America. The tariffs primarily targeted key industries such as automotive manufacturing, agriculture, and raw materials, putting immense pressure on companies and workers who relied on seamless cross-border trade. The response from Canada was swift. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau condemned the tariffs and announced retaliatory measures, including duties on American goods such as dairy products, grain, and industrial materials. The tit-for-tat escalation signaled a deepening trade dispute, with both sides preparing for a prolonged economic standoff. The farming industry, one of the largest sectors affected by these tariffs, was among the first to experience severe disruptions. Agricultural sector turbulence. American farmers, already dealing with unpredictable weather patterns and fluctuating commodity prices, found themselves caught in the crossfire of the US-Canada trade war. Canada has long been one of the largest buyers of American agricultural products, importing billions of dollars worth of crops and livestock each year. However, with the implementation of tariffs, this trade flow was severely disrupted. One of the hardest hit groups was dairy farmers. Canada imposed retaliatory tariffs on American dairy products, making them more expensive for Canadian consumers. This led to a sharp decline in dairy exports, putting significant financial pressure on American dairy farmers who relied on the Canadian market. Many small dairy farms, already struggling to compete with larger agricultural operations, faced the possibility of closure due to declining revenue. Grain farmers were also deeply affected. Corn and soybean exports to Canada, which had previously been a stable source of income for American farmers, became more expensive due to tariffs. As a result, Canadian buyers turned to alternative sources, including domestic production and imports from other countries. This left American farmers with surplus crops that they struggled to sell, causing grain prices to plummet. Livestock farmers, particularly those in the beef and pork industries, faced similar challenges. The cost of exporting meat to Canada increased, leading to decreased demand and lower prices for American livestock producers. Many farmers were forced to either absorb losses or reduce their herd sizes to stay financially viable. The consequences of these disruptions extended beyond individual farms. Entire rural communities that depended on agriculture experienced economic downturns, with reduced business for equipment suppliers, transportation companies, and local food processors. The trade war exacerbated financial instability in an industry that was already facing numerous challenges. As farmers and automakers grappled with the economic fallout of tariffs, everyday consumers also began to feel the pinch through rising prices on essential goods. Consumer price inflation. While tariffs were initially framed as a way to protect American industries, they quickly translated into higher costs for consumers. As companies faced increased expenses on imported goods, many had no choice but to pass these costs along to buyers. This led to noticeable price hikes on essential products, from groceries to household goods. One of the most immediate effects was the rise in food prices. The tariffs on agricultural products made imports more expensive, reducing the availability of certain foods and driving up costs in grocery stores. Dairy products in particular saw significant price increases as American producers attempted to offset their losses from decreased exports. Meat prices also fluctuated due to disruptions in the livestock trade. Beyond food, household goods and construction materials became more expensive. Canada is a major supplier of raw materials such as lumber, aluminum, and steel, all of which are critical for American manufacturing and home building. With tariffs inflating the cost of these materials, construction companies had to raise prices on new homes and renovation projects. This made home ownership and maintenance more costly for average Americans. Energy prices were also affected. Canada supplies a large portion of the United States' oil and natural gas needs, and trade disruptions created instability in fuel markets. Gasoline prices saw fluctuations, with some regions experiencing sudden spikes at the pump. The overall impact of these price increases was felt most acutely by low and middle-income households, which allocate a higher percentage of their income to essential goods. As costs continued to rise, consumer spending patterns shifted, with many households cutting back on non-essential purchases. As farmers and automakers grappled with the economic fallout of tariffs, everyday consumers also began to feel the pinch through rising prices on essential goods. But this was not just an industry problem. Households across the United States found themselves paying more for basic necessities, creating a ripple effect throughout the economy. Strained diplomatic relations. The ongoing trade war has placed a significant strain on the historically cooperative relationship between the United States and Canada. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and other government officials have voiced strong opposition to the tariffs imposed by the United States, arguing that they are unjust, economically damaging, and counterproductive to the long-standing partnership between the two nations. These trade barriers, originally introduced as a means of protecting domestic industries in the United States, have instead led to an erosion of trust between the two allies. For decades, Canada and the United States have been deeply interconnected economically and diplomatically. The two countries have engaged in a wide range of cooperative agreements, from military alliances such as the North Atlantic Treaty Organization to economic frameworks like the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement. However, the imposition of tariffs on Canadian exports, particularly in key industries such as agriculture, energy, and manufacturing, has led to diplomatic friction that is difficult to ignore. Canadian leaders have taken a firm stance against these trade policies, calling them both unfair and short-sighted. Trudeau has emphasized that Canada has always been a reliable trade partner and that punitive tariffs do little to strengthen economic ties between the two countries. The Canadian government has also engaged in high-level discussions with other global economic powers, seeking to diversify its trade relationships in response to these restrictions. On the American side, officials have maintained that these tariffs are necessary to protect domestic industries, citing trade imbalances and national security concerns as justification. However, within the United States itself, not all policymakers are in agreement. Many lawmakers, especially those representing states heavily reliant on cross-border trade with Canada, have voiced their concerns about the unintended consequences of these tariffs. Economic analysts have warned that deteriorating diplomatic ties with Canada could have ripple effects that extend beyond trade, affecting future cooperation on issues such as climate policy, border security, and international diplomacy. As tensions rise between the two nations, Canada's response has been swift and strategic, implementing retaliatory measures that have intensified the economic standoff. Retaliatory measures and trade policies. Canada did not remain passive in the face of the United States tariffs. In response, the Canadian government implemented a series of retaliatory tariffs aimed at counterbalancing the economic impact of the U.S. trade restrictions. These measures targeted key American exports, including aluminum, steel, agricultural products, and consumer goods. The retaliatory tariffs were strategically designed to impact industries in politically significant states within the United States. By focusing on products such as dairy, beef, and manufactured goods, Canada placed economic pressure on regions that have historically supported protectionist trade policies. This approach was intended to encourage American lawmakers to reconsider their stance on tariffs by demonstrating the economic consequences for their constituents. Beyond direct retaliation, Canada also sought to strengthen trade agreements with other global partners. The Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership and trade deals with the European Union were prioritized as Canada sought alternative markets for its goods. By reducing dependence on American markets, Canada aimed to insulate its economy from future trade disruptions, while simultaneously sending a strong message to Washington. However, the economic consequences of this trade war have not been one-sided. While Canada's retaliatory tariffs were designed to counterbalance American measures, they also had domestic implications. Canadian businesses that relied on American imports faced higher costs, leading to increased prices for consumers. Additionally, industries that depend on unintegrated supply chains across the border experienced logistical challenges that complicated production and distribution. Despite these challenges, Canadian officials remained steadfast in their approach. They argued that these measures were necessary to defend national economic interests, and that conceding to American trade demands would set a dangerous precedent. Canadian leaders also emphasized that a strong, diversified trade strategy would benefit the country in the long run by reducing economic dependence on a single trading partner. While these trade battles played out between the two nations, broader implications emerged on the global stage, raising concerns about the stability of multilateral trade agreements. Impact on multilateral trade agreements. The trade war between Canada and the United States did not occur in isolation. Instead, it raised significant questions about the future of multilateral trade agreements and the stability of global economic frameworks. One of the most affected agreements was the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, which was meant to replace the North American Free Trade Agreement and modernize trade relations between the three countries. The USMCA was initially designed to create a balanced and mutually beneficial trade relationship among its member countries. However, the imposition of unilateral tariffs by the United States contradicted the principles of free trade that the agreement was meant to uphold. Canada, along with Mexico, questioned whether the US was truly committed to honoring its obligations under the agreement. This uncertainty created a climate of instability that deterred foreign investment and disrupted supply chains across North America. Beyond the USMCA, the trade dispute also had ramifications for other global trade agreements. Countries observing the deteriorating US-Canada trade relationship began re-evaluating their own trade strategies. Some nations sought to strengthen economic ties with Canada as a way to bypass American tariffs, while others reconsidered their reliance on US markets altogether. The broader economic uncertainty also led to fluctuations in currency values, investment trends, and corporate decision-making. Companies that once viewed North America as a stable and predictable economic region began to explore alternative manufacturing and distribution strategies. Some multinational corporations relocated operations to countries with more predictable trade policies, further complicating the economic landscape. For Canada, the disruption of multilateral trade agreements underscored the importance of economic diversification. Canadian officials accelerated negotiations with Asia-Pacific nations, the European Union, and other trade blocs to secure alternative markets for exports. These efforts were aimed at ensuring long-term economic stability and reducing reliance on American trade policies that could change with each political administration. As international trade agreements faced uncertainty, domestic political reactions in both Canada and the United States intensified, shaping national debates on economic policy. Domestic political fallout. The economic and diplomatic tensions between Canada and the United States did not just impact trade relations, they also had significant domestic political consequences in both countries. In the United States, the trade war fueled debates over the effectiveness of protectionist policies. While the tariffs were promoted as a strategy to protect American industries and jobs, many businesses and consumers felt the financial strain. Lawmakers in states that rely heavily on Canadian trade, such as Michigan, New York, and Pennsylvania, faced mounting pressure from business leaders and constituents. Farmers who depended on Canadian markets for exports voiced frustration over lost revenue, while manufacturers that relied on cross-border supply chains experienced increased costs. This led to calls from both major political parties to reassess the trade strategy and seek a resolution to the escalating conflict. In Canada, the trade war had a unifying effect on public opinion. The tariffs were perceived as an attack on Canadian economic sovereignty, prompting a rallying of support for domestic industries. Political leaders, regardless of party affiliation, took a firm stance against what was widely seen as unfair economic aggression from the United States. This sentiment translated into policy initiatives aimed at strengthening national industries, increasing domestic production, and expanding trade relationships beyond North America. The broader economic uncertainty also influenced electoral politics in both countries. In the United States, candidates running in states affected by the tariffs made trade policy a central issue in their campaigns. Some positioned themselves as defenders of American industries, while others advocated for a return to cooperative trade relations. In Canada, the government's handling of the trade dispute became a key issue in national discussions, shaping voter sentiment and policy direction. Ultimately, the political fallout from the trade war underscored the deep interconnectivity between economic policy and domestic governance. What began as a series of tariffs evolved into a defining issue that reshaped political discourse in both nations, highlighting the profound impact of trade decisions on everyday lives. As tensions rise, one of the most immediate effects has been on cross-border travel, which has taken a hit as citizens of both countries respond to the economic and political strain. Cross-border travel and tourism. For decades, the United States and Canada have shared one of the world's busiest and most open borders, facilitating tourism, business travel, and cross-border shopping. However, the escalating trade war has introduced a new layer of strain, leading to a noticeable decline in travel between the two countries. Canadian travelers, who have historically contributed billions to the American tourism industry each year, are now reconsidering their trips. Many Canadians view the tariffs as an economic attack and have responded by canceling vacations to U.S. destinations. Cities like New York, Las Vegas, and Miami, which have traditionally relied on Canadian tourists, have reported drops in hotel bookings and visitor spending. Even popular shopping destinations along the border, such as Buffalo, Detroit, and Seattle, have seen fewer Canadian shoppers crossing over for deals on clothing, electronics, and other goods. Conversely, American tourists have also shown hesitation in traveling to Canada. The perception of economic hostility, combined with retaliatory tariffs, has created a sense of uncertainty. While some American tourists still visit major Canadian cities like Toronto, Vancouver, and Montreal, the overall trend suggests a cooling of cross-border travel enthusiasm. The transportation sector has also felt the impact. Airlines and bus companies operating routes between the two countries have reported lower ticket sales, prompting adjustments in schedules and pricing strategies. Similarly, rental car companies and hospitality businesses have begun offering promotions to counteract the decline in cross-border visitors. Retailers and manufacturers are closely monitoring these shifts in consumer behavior, as long-term changes could reshape supply chains and marketing strategies. Some businesses have already begun adjusting their sourcing practices, looking for alternatives to mitigate the impact of shifting trade dynamics. While consumer activism is shaping the market, the broader economic and political implications of this trade war are still unfolding, with long-term consequences yet to be determined. Energy sector interdependencies. A shifting power dynamic. Canada plays a crucial role in America's energy supply, providing significant portions of oil, natural gas, and electricity. The two countries have maintained a strong energy trade relationship for decades, with pipelines and cross-border infrastructure ensuring a steady flow of resources. However, rising trade tensions and policy shifts have put this partnership under strain, threatening both energy prices and supply stability in the U.S. The United States imports vast amounts of crude oil from Canada, primarily from Alberta's oil sands. This supply has been essential for American refineries, keeping fuel prices relatively stable. However, recent Canadian efforts to diversify exports by increasing shipments to Asia and Europe have raised concerns about long-term reliability. If Canada shifts more of its oil exports away from the U.S., American energy companies may face price spikes and increased competition for alternative sources. Beyond oil, Canada is also a key supplier of natural gas, particularly to the northern U.S. states. Pipelines like the TC Energy Keystone system have facilitated this trade, but recent regulatory challenges and political disputes have created uncertainty. If Canada prioritizes domestic use or new international trade routes, American consumers and industries could see rising energy costs, especially during peak demand seasons. Electricity is another critical component of this relationship. Provinces such as Quebec and Manitoba export large amounts of hydroelectric power to states like New York and Minnesota. If trade policies disrupt these agreements, American utilities may need to seek more expensive or less sustainable alternatives, potentially driving up electricity bills for millions of households. As the energy sector grapples with shifting trade dynamics, the ripple effects extend into industries that depend on Canada's raw materials and manufacturing exports. Raw materials and manufacturing, rising costs, and supply chain challenges. Beyond energy, Canada supplies essential raw materials that serve as the backbone of American manufacturing. The U.S. relies heavily on Canadian exports of minerals, metals, and lumber, all of which are crucial for construction, automobile production, and consumer goods. Any disruption to this supply chain can have cascading effects, leading to increased production costs and potential shortages. One of the most significant raw material imports from Canada is softwood lumber, which plays a critical role in the U.S. housing market. In previous trade disputes, tariffs on Canadian lumber caused construction costs to rise, driving up home prices across the country. A prolonged trade war could once again put pressure on builders, worsening the housing affordability crisis already gripping many American cities. The manufacturing sector is also at risk, particularly industries that rely on Canadian aluminum and steel. Automakers, aerospace companies, and appliance manufacturers depend on these materials for production. Higher tariffs or supply constraints could force these industries to seek alternative sources, often at a premium, leading to increased prices for consumers. Additionally, Canada is a major supplier of critical minerals used in advanced technologies, including lithium, nickel, and cobalt. These elements are essential for electric vehicle batteries, renewable energy systems, and high-tech electronics. If Canada strengthens trade ties with other nations, particularly the European Union and China, American companies may find themselves competing for access to these valuable resources. As manufacturing faces material shortages and cost increases, another critical area of economic cooperation, technology and innovation, could also be at risk. Technology and innovation collaborations. The United States and Canada have long been partners in technological advancement, with cross-border collaborations driving innovation in artificial intelligence, telecommunications, and clean energy. However, recent trade tensions and shifting policies have created uncertainty about the future of this cooperation. One of the most significant aspects of this relationship is the free flow of talent between the two countries. Canada has become an attractive destination for skilled professionals, particularly in tech-related fields, due to favorable immigration policies and investments in research and development. As a result, some American companies have expanded operations in Canadian cities like Toronto and Vancouver. But if economic tensions worsen, this exchange of talent could slow, potentially hindering technological progress on both sides. Beyond workforce mobility, Canada's increasing alignment with other international partners may limit the US's access to groundbreaking innovations. For example, Canada has strengthened its research partnerships with the European Union, particularly in areas such as artificial intelligence and quantum computing. If these collaborations become more exclusive, American tech firms could face barriers to participating in cutting-edge development. Telecommunications industry is another area of concern. With the rollout of 5G networks and advancements in digital infrastructure, both countries have worked together to ensure security and efficiency. However, regulatory disputes over data privacy and cybersecurity could strain this cooperation, potentially leading to fragmented networks and operational inefficiencies. While technological shifts pose challenges for innovation, the trade dispute has even more immediate consequences in a sector that affects every American: healthcare. Healthcare and pharmaceutical supplies, a growing vulnerability. Perhaps the most critical area where Canada's trade decisions could impact the US is healthcare. Canada is a key supplier of pharmaceutical products, medical devices, and raw materials used in drug manufacturing. Any disruption in this supply chain could lead to increased healthcare costs, shortages of essential medicines, and delays in medical treatments. Many American hospitals and pharmacies rely on Canadian imports for life-saving drugs, particularly generic medications. With the US facing rising pharmaceutical costs, Canadian suppliers have historically helped keep prices in check. However, if Canada redirects its pharmaceutical exports to other global markets or implements policies that limit exports, American consumers could face higher costs and reduced availability of critical medication. Medical devices are another area of concern. Canada exports a range of healthcare equipment, from diagnostic tools to surgical instruments, that US healthcare providers depend on. Tariffs or regulatory disputes could make these products more expensive, leading to higher insurance premiums and out-of-pocket costs for patients. Additionally, Canada is a leading supplier of raw materials used in drug production, including active pharmaceutical ingredients. If trade barriers limit the availability of these materials, American pharmaceutical companies may be forced to source alternatives from other countries, potentially leading to quality concerns or longer production times. The healthcare implications of the trade dispute highlight the broader economic risks that come with disrupting long-established supply chains. Ensuring a stable and cooperative trade relationship is not just about economic interests. It directly impacts the well-being and livelihoods of millions of Americans. With Canada's influence growing across multiple industries, it is clear that the US must adapt to these economic shifts or risk long-term consequences. The trade tensions between the United States and Canada have revealed the deep economic interdependence that exists between the two countries. While agriculture has been the most visible battleground, Canada's influence extends extends into critical sectors such as energy, manufacturing, technology, and healthcare. As Canada strengthens its global trade relationships and implements policies that reduce reliance on the US, American industries must adapt to a new reality. The energy sector faces potential disruptions if Canada prioritizes exports to Europe and Asia. Manufacturing costs may rise due to tariffs on Canadian raw materials, affecting everything from automobiles to consumer electronics. Technological collaborations could slow as Canada seeks alternative research partners. Meanwhile, the healthcare system may experience increased costs and shortages if Canadian pharmaceutical exports are restricted. Ultimately, these shifts underscore the need for strategic planning and diplomatic engagement. Both countries benefit from a strong and stable trade relationship, and finding common ground will be essential to ensuring economic resilience. What do you think about the growing tensions between Canada and the US? Should the US take a more aggressive trade stance or find ways to rebuild cooperation? Drop your thoughts in the comments below.